Hello, everyone. I'm Jamie Stringham, and just to give you a little bit about my background, I'm an interior designer, and I am also, I have taught interior design for over 25 years and practiced interior design for over 35 years. So this is one of my passions is I love fabrics, materials, the textiles, and I especially really appreciated when I had school and took the textiles class myself. I learned so much, and I think that it applies in our everyday lives, and it's one of my favorite classes. So I did teach it for a lot of years in the college. I was rather surprised in speaking with the students from UNLV as well as Fresno State, and I knew that a lot of them they've had a hard time getting textile classes in their curriculum, and so as a result, I said, okay, let's do it. So I'm here today to give you a class on the textiles and kind of give you a real fast rundown. What could be one semester, we're going to break it up into 4 classes, and so we're going to go for it. Where I am located right now is I'm in the Area West showroom at the Las Vegas Design Center, and they were gracious enough to have us come in here today. We are in hopes that I know because of COVID, it's been really hard to do things face to face, and that is one of our big goals. So the next class, we really hope that as many of you can come, we'll be able to be here live and in person, especially next time because you can feel and see and touch. So we will do the best that we can do. If you have any questions, if you will put them into the Q&A box, and then later on into the discussion, we'll be able to answer those questions and we'll have a discussion at that point. But the Q&A will work better for us than putting it into the chat box. So keep that in mind. And with that, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. So I have a PowerPoint presentation that I put together. So I'm going to share my screen with you, and hopefully that will make it a little more exciting than just me totally. So here we go, and thank you very much. Okay. Give me 1 second because I'm not the quickest at this. Am I sharing my screen yet? Okay, let me get my technical people over here. Oh, down at the bottom. I've not seen that. Did I? Which one? This one? That's it. Right. Okay, let me get you into the play mode. Okay, give me just 1 second. It says that it's pulling it up, and you can still see me, right? Okay, that's good. I may get a little animated. I can hold something up. There we go. Okay, textiles for interiors. And this is a 1 of 4-part series. So today's class, we're going to be talking about, we'll talk about the fibers, and then next time we will be talking about the construction of material, and then the finishes and some miscellaneous things. And the last one is the use of fabric. So this is such a great opportunity to be able to kind of explain things to you. And hopefully I won't make this scientific fibers conversation boring, and I can give you enough stories and real life situations that help to bring it to life for you. Okay. Just in giving a little bit of a definition, casually we call fabric is usually called material. And what kind of material is that made of? You've heard those kind of terms, right? It's made of fibers, and they are the materials from which the material is made. So a fiber would be something, for instance, like the cotton. Each one of those, if I pulled apart a cotton ball, every one of those little pieces of like white lint is actually, that's called a fiber. So you can kind of put that into your head, what a fiber is. Then I take so many pieces of fiber and I can start to put them together in strands, and you can twist them together and they actually become what is called a yarn. Now, if I take several pieces of yarn and twist it together, it becomes a thread. And then I take the thread and I weave it together into fabric. So that's kind of how that works. Now, next class that we have, I think it'll be next month. When we do that class, then we will talk about how fabric is woven, and we will go through this. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to make sure that you understand the difference between a fiber, a yarn, a thread, and fabric. And even if you took that thread from like from a spool of thread, like sewing thread, if you pull it, you can see that is a whole bunch of little strands of yarn all kind of tied together. And that's called a ply. So we'll get into more details, but then you can see how that becomes stronger and stronger when they're all put together. Okay, I'm going to divide this into two areas. We're going to talk about natural fibers, and then we're going to talk about some synthetics. So under natural fibers, there's two kinds of natural fibers. The first one is protein, and the second one is called cellulosic. So if it's protein, it means that it's derived from an animal, so something that is actually living. And if it's cellulosic, then that becomes a vegetable fiber. And it comes from the stems, from leaves, from seed hairs, like for instance, the seed hairs that are found in cotton and flax. So the two different kinds, protein and cellulosic, sorry. One of the cellulosic fabrics, the first one that we're going to talk about is silk, or I should say fiber. Not fabric, but fiber is silk, and it's kind of the royal fabric. And after you learn a little bit about silk, then you'll start to understand why. Now, keep in mind, because it's animal-based, it's also considered a protein. Just like if you were to eat meat, right? You're getting your protein from that animal. So one thing that's kind of fun about silk is it accepts dyes better than any other. So it makes the most beautiful fabric. It also comes in an assortment of colors. When you see silk, you can see like fluorescent pinks and fluorescent colors, and it probably accepts dyes better than any other color. And that's why it's so beautiful, is because of the colors that you can get with it. It also has a beautiful, elegant, soft sheen to it. And it's a raw silk is thin and fragile. And I'll talk a little bit about the different types of silks after I tell you a little bit about how silk is made. You can also use silk in velvet and satins and brocades and in chiffon, taffeta. They were originally, all those fabrics were made out of silks, and back in the day. Okay, I have a little video that I hopefully, maybe it'll play. If not, I will tell you about it. Oh, here we go. This is where silk comes from. See that little weld worm? There's a beautiful moth. They're constantly eating the little mulberry leaves for about 42 days. And then they form a cocoon. Of all those cocoons in a liquid.
Machine. Sorry with the liquid, can be back.
I'm so good at this. How do I go back to my, my screen, my PowerPoint. Hold on. No, I don't.
Disney Plus, Hulu.
Okay, hold on. Okay, go ahead.
What are the dyes usually made of?
The dyes are made, that's a good question. Right there. One more second and I'll answer that question. I need to go there. And then let me click off of all my emails and give this back to the PowerPoint. Oh, I thought I was so clever. There we go. Okay, thank you. Okay, the dyes are made of different types of, it could be from fish, it can be from, they can be made from beets, it can be made from foods, it can be made from all kinds of things back in the ancient days. Now we're able to make them out of different types of chemical dyes and things like that that they add with it. So you get those beautiful colors and intense colors. I was so amazed when I remember going snorkeling in Cancun at one point, and when I was out in the ocean, I was shocked at all the fluorescent fish colors that there were. I figured that the fish would be kind of just plain colors, but instead they were these bright, intense colors. So that was kind of a fun thing to see. We've got one student here. Just a second. There's a chair right there. Pull it around, and then you can, or even sit with Sandy, and you can see on her laptop. Okay, there we go. Okay, all the technical difficulties are gone. I hope that kind of answers. So there's various forms of different types of dyes that are used, but typically they in the olden days when they used them, they all came from some. Oh, my slides are not up. No, I'm going ahead of schedules. I need to get back to where I can see. Just hit the escape button again. Okay, now I need to go back up to
Here?
right to there. Yes.
Okay.
I'm going to hold it right here for just a minute though and tell you it takes, I had the picture of the kimono. It takes, okay, got it. It takes 36,000 silk caterpillars, 60 days, and 1 ton of mulberry leaves to produce 12 pounds of raw silk. And that silk is produced by the larva in the silkworm that's spinning in its cocoon. And then they unreel that and make it into a yarn when they start pulling at it. Now, wait till you hear the statistics. I'm kind of reading my notes here because I don't have notes in front of me. That it takes 200 pounds of mulberry leaves that will produce 100 pounds of silk. And then I'm going to tell you about raw silk in just a minute. But when they unwind that filament, you actually come away with 1,700 to 1,000 yards of yarn out of one cocoon. So because it's so long, okay, there's my share button. And, oh, I promise by next time I'll be a pro at this.
It's this one right here, right?
Right. But I have to turn it on to this. I need to hit the play button up there, probably on the. We won't do videos next time. Okay. Okay. There we go. I'm back right there. And okay, it's coming in just a second. No more videos, darn it. The PowerPoint presentation, I guess when you're doing on a webcam, then you kind of end up skipping that out. I have the men's silk ties in the upper right-hand corner, and the reason why I have those silk ties there is because it takes 600 cocoons in order to make one silk tie. And then, of course, it takes all those to make a beautiful kimono. And then there's a pretty silk pillow, which I think is one of my favorite things as far as the something to use in the application to using silk. Can you hear my voice okay through the, okay. Because my face is not showing, right? Oh, okay. After, we're going to move away from silk for a minute, and we're going to talk about hair. And what the definition of wool is, it's basically hair from an animal. And there's different types of animal that produce different types of fabrics that we use. So I've listed a bunch of them on the PowerPoint here. We have the cashmere, which is actually from the Kashmir goat. So it's called cashmere, but it comes from a goat. And then we have what's called the camel hair, and a camel will shed its hair and every year. And there's people that actually have the job, if you can imagine this job. I think I'd rather be an interior designer, but they walk around behind the camel and they scoop up the hair that sheds. They pick it up off of the ground as the camel's kind of walking along. And a camel hair, it also comes from a 2-hump camel, not a 1-hump, but a 2-hump camel. We have mohair, and I know you've heard of mohair before, and mohair actually comes from an Angora goat. So that's another one from the goat family. Then we have the Angora, which actually the Angora hair, and that comes from a bunny rabbit. So, or an Angora rabbit. So you have the mohair from the Angora goat and Angora from a bunny rabbit. Then we have the llama and alpaca and vacuna. These are some different types of wools again that you'll hear. We have lamb's wool, and we have the merino, which is the finest breed of sheep. So those are a few different types. Wool versus fur. The difference between wool and fur is actually still attached to the hide, and then it becomes a fur. But when you cut that off and use that fur, then it's wool. So the hair on your head is actually a fur. And if you cut your hair off and weave it into fabric, then you have yourself some beautiful wool. Upholstery and carpet are great uses, as well as wall decor, but they make beautiful, beautiful carpets with wool. And we'll talk a little bit about that again when we get down to the use of it. But one of the reasons is because it is so resilient and it's hard to wear out. Now, it's very expensive. So if you get a wool carpet, you better like it, because you're going to not only pay a big good penny for it, but it will last and last. It'll last to almost forever. I mean, the wearability is great. It's resilient. You can kind of squish it up and it pops right back. I have a piece of wool right here that I got out of the showroom. And I mean, I can crunch this up into like a little ball like this, and you can't, can you see my picture on the camera? Because I can't see me. Maybe I'm scrunching for nothing. Are we good? Okay, good. Okay, I can't see my picture, so I wasn't sure. There you go. Okay, so that's what wool, and that's why it has such great wearability. So there's a lot of great properties. Another one is it has staple fibers, which means that the wool is actually kind of long. So those little strands they're long, therefore they can be woven in and they become very strong. The colors will vary per animal, and it also will shrink, but there's 3 things that will cause wool to shrink. The first one is heat. The second is moisture. The third is agitation. So if you put a wool sweater in the washing machine with warm water, there's your heat. Then you put it in the moisture, which is the water, right? And then you turn it on and agitate it. When it comes out, it will be half the size as to what you bought. So it might look like a little child sweater instead of an adult sweater by the time you're done. Here's my most favorite story. When I was in college and interior design school, and I remember I was taking the textiles class, I had gone to New York on this little trip. And while I was in New York, I was walking around Central Park, and then we were going to go to the theater that night after our little wander around Central Park. It started to rain, and I mean poured down rain. I was wearing a red silk top, and it was intense red because it had all the dyes, because it absorbs and holds that dye, but the dye doesn't do well with the water. So the dye started to run down my wool pants, and they were white wool pants. So now I had these streaking red lines going down, and I'm walking briskly to get out of the rain. I'm in the water, and I'm in the agitation from the walking. And I guess it was just warm enough still that it ended up with the heat. By the time I got back to the hotel room, my pants were this much too short, and the lining of the pants was hanging past the pants itself. And there I was a total wreck and a total mess, as well as my fur on top of my head, which was my hair. And that was totally like, it, obviously you can imagine, it was a mess. So we didn't go to the theater that night. Okay, go ahead. We've got one more question.
Is the wool shaven off for goats and rabbits like it's shaven off for sheep?
Yeah, yes. With the camels, like I said, it picks up the hair. With the goats, they will trim it a little bit different than they do the sheep. With the sheep, they shear it. In fact, I have a picture coming up in just 1 minute, and you can kind of see that whole process. It's really interesting. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Keep in mind that wool also absorbs the water and the moisture as well. And it's resilient. Okay, I'll answer the questions in just a minute when we get past this section. Okay, so here's a picture of what's called the shearing process. So this is where they hold down the animal, and it happens at a specific time of the year. And that's when they shear usually like in the springtime, then they'll shear that sheep, and he'll get rid of his winter's coat, and they just kind of cut off. It doesn't hurt the animals. In fact, just like it feels good to have all that hair off of their bodies. So that's the shearing process. The next process that they do after they shear it is they do what's called, they carbonize it. And really what carbonizing is they put like an acid wash on it, and it literally helps to get rid of all of it cleans it, is what it does. It cleans it. And then they start to put all the strands into and straighten them up so that they're all kind of facing the same direction. The next thing that they do after they carbonize it is then they do what's called carding. And carding is kind of like a comb, and it's almost like, it's like combing the hair. And so then it really makes it nice and straight before then they start to wind it into a piece of yarn, and then weave it into fabric. Now, the reason why this is really important to understand this part is it all has to do with the money. The more process they go through, the more expensive that wool is going to be. You might even hear something that's been double carded, which means that they've combed it more than once. Another little thing to keep in mind with that is that when they go through that whole carding the carding process, there's different types of wools, and it will determine. I don't have my notes right in front of me that I made. Let me look real fast here, and then I'm going to give you just a little bit more information on it. So hold on. I had that on my little notes at the very bottom. Next time I'll print out my notes, now that I realize that doesn't work the same. Oh, well. Okay, let me tell you really fast. Okay, so they have, they're on a sheep too, there's a lot of lanolin that they will use for lotions and etc. So they have to clean that, which becomes very greasy. So they have to kind of get rid of that. And you also have a term which is called raw wool. And that's right after you shear the sheep, you get the raw one. And they comes off of a dead animal's wool. We also have a different type that's called, it might be a new wool, recycled wool, and that could be from worn clothing. And then there's also reprocessed wool, and that could come from the cutter's scraps, like the wool that's fallen in a cutting room where they've cut up things to make furniture, make something with, and whatever, they sweep up the floor and then they kind of make something else. The reason why I tell you all of that and that that's important is because if you are, it determines the price. You might see something that's 100% wool and say, what's the difference between this wool and that wool? And it's all about the whole process. And it might be all wool, 100% wool, but it could be off the floor as opposed to, or recycled, and it's still considered 100% wool. So therefore, you have to be careful on what it is that you're buying. And that kind of explains why the price can be a lot more expensive or not. Okay, I have another wool question, Sandy.
How is wool cleaned, and can you reverse the shrinkage of a wool item?
You cannot, once it's shrunk, it's over. My pants that I was wearing in New York was actually, it was woven into a crepe wool. And in that particular case, did I repeat the question? It says, how do you reverse the shrinkage? I hate it when you're on a call and you can't hear the question, so I apologize for doing that. But you can't really reverse it. Once it's shrunk, it's over with. You can try ironing, you can try doing everything to stretch it out, but it's really kind of shot once it's shrunk, it's shrunk. And what was the other question? Cleaning it, I think I talked about that. They do put it in a big vat. There's some acid, which doesn't affect the wool, and that's how they clean it. They get rid of all of that. Oh, how do you clean wool? You can wash wool in a washing machine if it's not crepe wool, but you can wash it, but it has to be with cool water. And you also do not want to use a regular detergent because that has the alkaline in it, but you can use like Woolite. And if you put the Woolite in, you're okay. Just make sure it's cold water and it has that Woolite and not the regular detergent, which has alkali in it. Okay, good. Okay, now I'm going to move on to cotton. It's the popular favorite and it's been around forever as well. And it's what we call cellulosic because it is made from vegetable, not from an animal. It's easy to use, to live with. It soils and it wrinkles fairly easy. Now I have a piece of cotton fabric right here, this gorgeous fancy one. If I were to wrap this up like that, do you see those wrinkles? They stay right in it. I mean, and you have to iron them out. So you can iron, you can put on other finishes, which we'll talk about in another day. But that's basically the downside to the cotton. It does wrinkle and it will soil. It absorbs the moisture and it releases it quickly as well. So one of my favorite things to wear, especially in the summertime in Las Vegas, is wearing a cotton shirt because it absorbs the moisture and it releases it. It takes it away from the body. And so therefore it breathes. Sometimes you watch people and they have like a polyester shirt on and they're just hot, and that's the reason. Now, when it comes to, and I'll talk about this later, when it comes to sleeping, I will not sleep with anything unless it's 100% cotton. If it has polyester in it, I wake up and I'm like burning hot. So we'll talk more when we get into the use of fabrics, but that is one of the reasons, is because it absorbs the moisture and it releases it away from your body. It doesn't unravel when you cut it, and it also accepts dye very well. So you have a lot of beautiful colors, and it's fade resistant. It's less expensive than silk or wool, and that's that. So here again, we have the cotton, and it comes from a cotton ball, which is a plant. They pick off the little cotton and then they card it. And carding it again is just putting it together so that it's just making a straight, it just straightening it out. And then after they've carded it, they actually comb the cotton just like they did with the wool. It's all combed, and then they twisted in to make their threads. And then you see this girl sleeping in this beautiful cotton bed and her cotton sweater. You have a lot of different applications for that. Cotton, like I mentioned, it's a vegetable fiber and it comes from plants. The term Pima cotton is actually what that is it's Egyptian cotton. And the reason why, again, when you buy sheets or you look at certain cottons, what makes one better than another is if they're over in Egypt, they say that they come with longer, the threads are longer, which as opposed to in the United States, we have shorter cotton. So we have these little tiny fibers. Now, what happens with those little tiny fibers is when you go to put the little fibers and you're trying to weave them into, or, you know, card them, and then you're spinning them into a piece of yarn, you have the little ends that kind of poke on through that don't, you know, that just don't kind of tie into that thread. So therefore you have all the, I always think of it like the split ends are all kind of popping out. Whereas the longer the thread, then it's a lot smoother. So you have a much more silkier type of a cotton. If it's an Egyptian cotton, it's usually a little smoother and you don't have as many ends. Now what happens if you get all those little ends, they start to, when you rub them, you know, after a while, they start to kind of ball up a little bit and you get what's called peeling. And that's because of all the little fibers. So when we talk about weaves, you'll hear like a sateen, Egyptian cotton. Again, it's the way that it's woven, it's the type of cotton, it's the type of fiber, and that way it makes a wonderful sheet to sleep in. And that's the difference between why you pay more money for an Egyptian cotton sheet versus a plain regular just cotton sheet. The combing is, again, it's more expensive to comb it. The more it's combed, the stronger and smoother that it becomes. And cotton is also hydrophilic, which means the first word hydro means water and philic means loving. So it loves water. And like I mentioned, it absorbs the water. The cotton is in medium strength. It's not as strong as silk because silk has all those long, long threads, remember? It's not quite as strong, but it's still it's still fine. It swells when it's wet. So it actually becomes stronger when it's wet. It's easy to launder it. It's great to wash. You can use the detergent with it's alkaline. And again, you can iron it and it does, you know, have it's bad resistance to wrinkles. Cotton carpet, cotton rugs, it's going to flatten out because it doesn't have that resilience like a nylon or a wool would. It cannot stretch and expect it to go back to its shape. Have you ever worn a cotton sweater and as the day goes on, it gets bigger and bigger? When you wash it, it does kind of stretch back, but with time. They'll blend it with polyester a lot of times so that it does give you a nice combination, not quite as wrinkled, and there's things that they can do to it. It loses its strength under the sunlight and age. It'll eventually rot. And again, it's great for cotton towels because that helps to absorb. Let me go back to silk one time for just a minute. One of the downsides to silk is that it does rot in the sun. So it's not a great fabric for window treatments unless it's lined, and make sure that silk is facing into the room where it doesn't get the sunlight, because it doesn't last long. Cotton is better, but not as good as other fabrics. Flax is actually, what flax is it's the fiber. It's kind of from the stem of the plant is where flax comes from. And flax is a fiber. When it's turned into fabric, it's then called linen. Its production is very expensive, but it's much longer staples. Look at the difference here. You have 12 to 24 inches long, whereas cotton is about 1 to 2.5 inches long. So you can imagine the difference. Resilient to sunlight. It's great for drapery because of that. And it has a beautiful hand. That's the terminology that we use, the hand of a fabric. It's the way that the fabric drapes, the way that it feels in your hand. So you don't say, oh, this feels really nice. You say it has a lovely hand, because it sounds a lot more professional, like a designer would like to sound. The longer fibers will not leave the lint like the shorter ones will. And it's hydrophilic, which means it loves it. The water does not absorb as much, but it still is okay with water. Wrinkles, and it is a brittle fiber, however. Have you ever had a linen tablecloth, and when you fold the linen tablecloth, or even I've had a jacket, a linen jacket, and where my arm is creased, it has a tendency to all of a sudden it's like it cracks because it's almost like a thicker stem of a plant, and when you break it, when you bend it, it breaks, right? Like if think of the stem of a flower, it breaks it, and that's what happens with the flax. So if you have a linen tablecloth, you want to roll it. You don't want to fold it up and put it in the drawer, but you roll it, and you should store your linen in a roll for that use. The way that they that they manufacture this is it's called a rippling. They remove all the seeds, and then they do retting, which decomposes that woody stalk on the outside of the plant. They kind of get rid of all that. They have scrunching, which breaks open the stalk. Hackling, which is that process like the combed and carded. And the more well hacked it is, it's very expensive. It's very well hacked. And you have shorter fibers or toes, and the longer fibers are flax, and it's called the line. Beetling is when they take a hammer on the fabric and they just hammer it and make it flat, and it gives a very luscious and lustrous and more of a stain resilient look to the fabric. And I do have some linen I was going to show you as well, just so you can kind of see the hand of it. This right here is a piece. This is a very finely woven linen, but it's just beautiful. And yes, you can see the wrinkles, but sometimes the wrinkles are sort of what makes it look so nice. It's okay because it's linen. We all go, oh, it's all wrinkly. That must be expensive. Here's a beautiful fabric that's again made out of linen, and it just has a nice way, the way that it hangs, it like if it's used in drapery, it's absolutely beautiful. It's there's just nothing like it. My latest thing is I've wanted to do this forever, and about 2-3 years ago, I bought 100% linen sheets, and I can't go back. They might wrinkle, and I have to kind of tuck them in the bed because it gives a little bit more of that shabby look. But I'm telling you, it is heaven to sleep in 100% linen. Really fun. This right here is polyester, which we'll talk about in a minute. It kind of looks like linen, but it just does not hang, and it just doesn't hold that same look like a true linen holds. So I just showed you that for an example. Okay, now we're going to move right along into the man-made fibers. Any questions on that, Sandy? Are we still okay? Okay. We're moving into the man-made fibers, and we have, there's two types. There's natural and there's synthetics. So even though it's man-made, they also will take the fibers in animal plants, and they can they can melt them down and kind of make a man-made fiber out of using natural ingredients. And they do the same thing with the plant, where they add ingredients, it will make a natural fiber. Then we have what's called the man-made fiber, which is totally 100% made out of chemicals. And this little pyramid kind of shows you that. The top pyramid, man-made fibers, you have natural, and then you have totally synthetic, like a polymer, polyesters, nylon, and others will have a little combination of both, like you have your natural polymer fiber, rayon, acetate, and it'll come to me in a minute, my slide comes along, but you'll have two different types there. Okay, here's the process that kind of starts to happen. You have, when they're making a synthetic fabric, you have a solution where it's melted down. It's basically put into like a big container, and it's all just liquids. So they've melted everything down, and then they have little holes which are called the spinnerets, and the liquid drops down through those little spinnerets, and they have either cold air, which is, there's wet spinning, then there's warm air flow, or melt spinning. So there's different ways that they kind of do it, but they are able to that comes down that spinet and it forms those little long threads once it hits the cold air, and it hardens. And so now, because of that, they can change the shapes of that spinneret, and so they can make any different shapes that they want. So if you have a nylon thread, you might have something that is too shiny, but they can deluster it by giving it a little bit of a look where they turn it shaped, the threads are shaped different, and it takes away from the shininess of a plane. If it was round and the light hits the surface and it's a solid surface, it's going to be it'll be very shiny. So I guess the best way to kind of describe that is if you look at a nylon carpet, and if it's an inexpensive, cheap nylon carpet, it may have such a shine to it that it really doesn't look real. We're always trying to make it look more natural, kind of like that wool carpet. So when they do the delustering, they actually change the shape of those little fibers or the threads. And when they change that shape, then when they can get rid of the shine to it because it's not as reflective, and then when they weave it in, it has more of a wool-like look to it, but it has the resiliency. So it's really kind of a cool thing. Could be a little boring, but anyway, this is sort of a great little demonstration that sort of shows you how it goes from the spinneret, and then it stretches it out, then it's washed, and then it's applied the fiber finish, which we'll talk about that later, and then they heat it up and it holds its place, and there you go. Okay, the first one we're talking about, we're going back to what's called the cellulosic man-made. Cellulosic means it's using natural plant-based. It's rayon is an example of a cellulosic man-made. Rayon is very similar to cotton. And we have viscose, which is a new silk substitute, and acetate, which is also silk-like. So those are they're actually natural base. Viscose is somewhat of a new silk substitute. It just kind of, it's a more recent. They're constantly, obviously, reinventing. Whereas, you know, you take things like linen that's been around. In fact, they used to wrap the mummies in linen, and they're still good to this day. They will last forever. And that's how they use things. But linen is linen. There's not a lot you can do. Cotton is cotton. You can't add a whole lot to it. But when it comes to the man-made, now all of a sudden we're constantly improving. And now a new thing is they have the high performance fabrics, which we'll talk about later in another session. And it makes such a difference the way that you have the wearabilities, and we're constantly coming up with a new thing. But that viscose is beautiful, and it's beautiful in carpet. It is a lot more like a silk is sort of what it appears to be. And acetate I think the acetate sort of like being like your nightgowns were made out of, well, it's a nylon, but the acetate just, it's a little silk-like also. Okay, then we have very non-cellulistic, and you probably all remember wearing a pair of nylons. We don't wear them that much anymore. And of course, they were made back in the 30s or 20s and 30s. That's when they started wearing, showing their ankles, and they would wear these nylons. And it was actually World War II. I think it was World War. I'm getting my wars mixed up. I think it's 1 or 2. Yeah, they started to make them. Anyway, and then they made the ladies' stockings, and that was all the rage. It has great tenacity, and it has that elastic recovery where you can stretch it, unlike cotton, and it just kind of snaps right back to it. Prior to nylon, they were wearing silk. They'd make their nylons or socks out of silk material. And so then with the nylon, it has that elasticity. And so it was wonderful because it kind of, really would stick to the body, bounce back. It's all 100% chemical base. And nylon is a great uses in carpet. Like I said, you get different shades, and it also can hide that dirt, and it has great resiliency. Polyester is highly resilient, and it will not wrinkle as well. And that's another wonderful fabric that you can make things out of, but it doesn't have the same resiliency that nylon has. So if you're looking at carpet, I would not go the polyester route. Also, polyester, is wonderful when it's added with another fabric. I have this fabric right here, which looks like wool, and it is 80% wool and 20% polyester. So it's a polyamide. So therefore, it brings the cost down. It adds a little something to it, but it has the resiliency. So a blended fabric can actually be a real great choice as well. The next man-made synthetic fabric, and there's a ton more, but I'm only giving you the top few, and that is olefin. It's strong, resistant to moisture, and it's resistant to stain. When they use olefin in carpet, you can practically dump anything on it and nothing will absorb into it. I mean, it's excellent as far as getting rid of. You can clean it and clean it and clean it. And so they'll use olefin a lot of times for like outdoor rugs are made of olefin because it's so resistant. It's not, it's a different feel to it. It's not an expensive, it's usually inexpensive, and it's not a great, soft, luxurious look, but as far as wearability, it's wonderful. And olefin is used as a high performance fabric as well. And because again, it just does not absorb that moisture, and it won't absorb the stains. The next kind is what's called a vinyl non-woven, and which would be sort of, it looks like leather, but it's called vinyl, and it's a kind of like a plastic is really what it is, but it's very durable, and it's also easy to clean. You can just wash it off. So there's a lot of other little fibers and fabrics and things like that. Now, what I would like everyone to do, and I think that was the end of my slideshow. It is. And let me see if I can get myself back onto my face. I guess you can see me, right? Am I sharing? You're seeing, okay, I don't want you to see my screen. I have too much stuff on my screen. Stop share. There, now you can see me. I can see me too. Okay, so what I would like you to do is go to, if you're in Las Vegas, I would encourage everyone to come down to the Las Vegas Design Center and go to the Area West showroom. There's other showrooms, but we have the largest selection of fabrics right here, and walk around and find linen, examples of linen, and find examples of cotton, and find examples of wool, 100%, okay? Then I want you to find the synthetic fabrics, and again, find a blend, for instance. Feel the difference between them, because you'll start to kind of go, oh, okay. Now, one of the reasons why I think that textiles is so crucial as a designer is because if you don't understand it and you specify the wrong fabric, it's a game changer. And people are wondering, how come, my draperies aren't hanging right? How come the upholstery is not right? In a commercial spot, I would use a high performance, like an olefin type fabric. And that's because, I did assistant living centers, and you have people that have accidents. Well, obviously you don't want to, ruin your entire sofa, but it just literally can be washed right off and cleaned up, because again, it doesn't penetrate. So, those things are really important, but you need to touch and feel and really see the difference between fabrics. That kind of helps you to explain why fabrics cost more money, and it's because of what it's made of. It all totally makes sense. Sometimes sometimes it just doesn't make sense, because some are just really outrageous. But that's part of, by understanding and becoming educated, you can then educate your client and explain to them why things are so expensive, and so they don't have their heart attack. I have a question, and that is,
Are there advancements in synthetic textiles to help improve sustainability?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's constantly advancements being made. In another class, we're going to be talking about finishes that's put onto fabrics. And at that point, I will really get into that subject. So let's just put that in the parking lot, and we'll hold that question for later on to answer that in more of a deep dive.
There's somebody who said solution dyed acrylic is another great synthetic performance fabric.
Solution was,
Dyed acrylic.
yes, absolutely. Acrylic is another great one. And again, it's a solution dyed. They put actual chemicals into that liquid form, and they have things that will resist that. So like I said, we'll take that into a deeper dive later on, but basically when it's synthetic, they just can add what they want to add into that big that big liquid pot. I think of it like a big kettle, and they just put the things that help to deluster it. They put things in it that will help it to resist stain. They'll put things in it they put whatever they want chemically, and then it comes out, and then they process it, and it goes from there. So, and again, you can also make those fibers as long as you want, or pretty long. Therefore, they become very strong and very durable. Any other questions? Okay. And I think that if that's the only questions that you have, we really would hope that next month, when we put it out in the newsletter as to what date we're going to do it, hopefully the governor will not be having us in as much of a lockdown mode as we felt like we've had. And then you can actually come live, and they will provide lunch and have a wonderful time, because it really makes a difference when we can do and actually touch and feel. And we'll want to be real observant as we were talking about the way that fabric is woven together. Are there any other questions or anything else that you might have that I can help to answer?
Yes. I have found good upholstery people and drapery workroom people and can help with decisions on fabrics you're considering. This is Ruth Jacobs.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Ruth had mentioned that there's good upholstery people that can help you in the decision as well. Absolutely. Talk to your drapery workroom, talk to your fabric. If you're ever in doubt, ask them, what can we do to make this work? Or does it just not work? They can let you know. There's a lot of different fabrics, and they know because they work with it. It was interesting. One time I was using some black cotton fabric, and I remember my workroom, her hands were totally black when she was done. And she's like, I have to use gloves when I'm working with this black cotton, because the colors were coming off. And sometimes they'll even have a mask, because sometimes there's fumes that will come off of it, especially if it's been flame retardant, which that's another one that the synthetics, they can put, again, in that kettle, they put flame retardant into that. The flame retardants can come afterwards, but it can also come beforehand. And so again, you have to be very careful what fabrics that you are specifying. We'll get into all of that in our third class as well. And I think, is that any other questions?
Can you click on the question there? There's a couple.
Oh, there's a couple more questions. Let me see. Do you know of showrooms in California that we could go to visit? Oh, Marisol, you're in Fresno, and I do know that they do have fabric showrooms that would be in Fresno. Holly could probably answer that question for you better than I, because she knows the area. But they do have, most all cities will have some kind of a fabric workroom. The other place where you can go to visit, and that's a great question because you want to be able to get your hands on it. Also go to even an upholstery shop, and they will have books and books and hanging samples, sort of like what I have behind me. They'll have rooms like this. So Holly would be a great one for the Fresno State people, and to tell you where to go. And the other would be actually an upholsterer shop or drapery workroom. And you can find those by looking in your phone book, and they can help you. And that's a much better place to go. I mean, there's like your Joann's or your Holly Hobbies or places like that, but you still need to, if you want the finer fabrics, you definitely want to go to a nice workroom for that. So I hope that answers that question. And Ruth mentions that show them the fabric and describe your intended application. We are going to be talking all about the application And we'll be doing that in our third class. So I'm not going to talk about applications today, or it's actually in the fourth class. And we'll do a deep dive right into that as well. So thank you. And I think, are there any other questions that you might have? If not, I think we were able to make it for 1 hour, and that was pretty good and pretty fast. There's a lot more that I could talk about, and but I think that, 1 hour is perfect, and we will continue on with this series. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or want to send an email to me with something that you might have questions later on, you're more than welcome to do so. And it's Jamie, Jamie, at Interior Dynamics with the plural S, LV.com. And just ask a question and I'll be happy to try to help you with that. I have one more question. Wendy's asking, are we automatically registered for other classes? And we will be sending you the admin for ASID Central California, Nevada chapter. We'll be sending you another invite automatically. Yes. And that will get you in. I think that they need to re-register. Yes, you'll need to re-register for the second class. So we'll keep you filled in on that. Great. And thank you for attending, and we'll go ahead and end this call.